Greetings, my name's Andrew Sumner. My grandfather, Pop Smythe, bought me my first comic book in Liverpool, England, when I was 3 years old, and I spent the next 50 years hurtling around the pop culture kaleidoscope, first as a fan, and then as a journalist, editor, publisher and presenter. Along the way, I met a bunch of interesting people who will be joining me here, creators, performers, professionals and public servants. We live in divisive, fractured times, but art and popular culture connect people from all viewpoints and from all walks of life. I'm often struck by the passions people enjoy, that they can set aside their differences for and agree on whatever those passions are, whether I share them or not. And that spark, that moment of instinctive, connective agreement, that's what I call a hard agree. But we did something that was pretty good actually, which is they have opened the Liver building up for the first time in its history to like the public, so you can actually go inside it and go up one of the towers, which I've wanted to do all my life. So that was a real treat. It was brilliant, and you know you got to go right inside the clock tower and then right to the base of where one of the Liver birds is, the one on the south overlooking the river.
I got lost in Liverpool. We were doing a gig and had to get to Liverpool Stadium, but they'd torn down virtually all the houses and buildings around there at the time. I mean, there was barely a landmark standing.
That's right.
And I got it. You know, I got to the gig late. I mean, not too late, but you know, I got there pretty late. I didn't get a sound check. It was just I don't know what it's like now. I think that was probably the last time I dared go into sort of Liverpool proper.
Yeah, well, that you're describing the Liverpool that I grew up in, and my dad used to work at the Northwest head office branch of the Midland Bank, which was on London Road, which when I was a kid was the tallest building I'd ever seen. You know, it's only about 7 stories actually. It's a large black building, but the whole area around it, which I've been told by my dad, you're in the 50s and 60s, was like Tailors and all this kind of stuff. All those streets have been knocked down. So it was like literally in the middle of a traffic island, in the middle of this wasteland, in the middle of nowhere. And that was the Liverpool of my youth for sure. It is very different now because when it got nominated the European City of Culture, I know about 15 years ago or whatever, there was a ton of European money went into the city, which benefited at no end, you know. So there's been a lot of development, none of it coming, by the way, from the UK or from the UK government. You know, all coming from Europe, which is why Liverpool is one of the few, you know, kind of traditional British cities to overwhelmingly vote to stay into the European Union. Of course, that turned out the way it turned out, but yeah, it looks very different now, and it's been quite a lot of the updating that's gone on in the city. It kind of respects all the brilliant old sort of Victorian and pre-Victorian architecture. So it's looking a lot better than it did when I was a kid. How it fares over the next 20 years, now that we're out of Europe, and you know, the Conservative government certainly got no love for Liverpool. We'll see.
Maybe Liverpool should declare independence, join Europe, and that'd be actually join. Yeah. All Liverpool has to do is join Ireland, and bingo, you know, that's it.
Yeah. I absolutely love that idea. I absolutely love that idea. And brilliant. I tell you what, I'll start this off before we get rolling. Welcome to Hard Agree. I'm Andrew Sumner, and welcome to our sub-strand on Hard Agree, which is Michael Moorcock's Multiverse, with the great man himself, Mr. Michael Moorcock.
Well, as a great man, not feeling too great. It's partly Texas heat, which is the famous, and I think just COVID lunacy. Also, I got a new computer, which just by some accident, all my current work was missing from it when the guy transferred it all for me, because I'm no good at any of that, and he, it wasn't his fault, but somehow it had just got moved. So I'm looking at it, and where's all the work? And kind of the only thing that's sort of keeping me more or less cheerful at the moment is working. You know, I'm doing some sort of light work. I'm enjoying it as a collaboration with a friend of mine. And and as a collaboration, of course, it also means the email has to work, which it wasn't. So I'd no idea how dependent I was on work. I mean, you always hear the old miners, who identified, with work, and that's all they could do. And when they were sort of laid off, there's nothing else they could do, and they just went mad and all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, it's a shame. I can see how that could happen. I never thought it would actually happen to me. And it's ridiculous, how much you identify with what you do, if you can't do it, even if you hate it when you are doing it sometimes.
No, it's so true. I've had that experience myself, and I know exactly how it feels. Now we kicked off actually by talking about a music-related anecdote with Liverpool, and that's what I wanted to focus on in this edition. But before we get into that, when I was reading around about a bunch of other things, a piece of information dropped before my eyes, which I have read before, and I realised it must have been 20 years since I read this. And I just wanted to ask you about it, because I don't know if this story is apocryphal or not. And it was about you getting involved with W.H. Smith about John Norman's Gore novels getting placed on a top shelf because of their content. And I wanted to ask you about that.
It's true.
Whether that's true, and your take on those books.
Yeah, my logic was, I'm very pro-feminist. It's, I raised in a house full of women. I probably couldn't have been anything else, as it were, or the opposite. But anyway, so an anti-censorship. And Smith's argument was that if they were going to stock stuff which, in my view, degraded women, they put it on the top shelf where kids couldn't get at it. That was their morality, their idea. Okay, so that was the compromise. It wasn't entirely, it's a difficult one, something like that, because you're dealing with censorship, you're dealing with all kinds of liberties and stuff. It's not an easy question if you don't, if you think porn's bad for people. So, anyway, I won't go into that. Sorry. But so I thought, Norman's books, after the weird thing is that I was offered the job before he got it. Not whipping women, but writing Edgar Rice Burroughs type, Sword and Planet adventures. Ian Ballantyne phoned me. And Ian Ballantyne, you never knew what Ian Ballantyne was saying. He came from the subject from such an angle that you were sort of, after an hour, you were sort of left wondering, what was all that about? Did I agree to something? Did he agree, or whatever it was? He was a nice guy, but so he's rambling away on the phone, and it turns out that he wants, I'd already done 3 Burroughs pastiches as a kind of I took Edgar Rice Burroughs' own ideas and applied them to his heroes, which meant that the heroes were forever moving away from fights because they didn't want to do any harm to people, because they're all saying how they don't want to do harm to people. But by the end of any book, there's about 5 million corpses piled up somewhere. So anyway, that's why I did those. And I didn't really, I had no other reason to do any more. So I turned it down. So he went to whatever the bloke's name is who writes as John Norman. And the first, Townsman of Gore was the first one, I think. And it was, looked all right to me. I wasn't engrossed by it, but it was, it was a fair Burroughs pastiche, nothing too bad about it. But gradually the books became obsessive. Genuinely obsessive. The sort of things you see written out, in until the pencils run out or the biros run out on a toilet door, So you'd like to know what it was all about. You can't probably tell, but nonetheless, it's the product of a disturbed mind, and that's what they got to be like, to the point where Ballantyne's wouldn't publish them anymore. Don Walheim, on the other hand, has a certain penchant. I won't say any more than that because I don't know any more than that. But he has been known to change the title of, I think it was called The Temple, a John Wyndham story, for a magazine that Dom edited, to, I think it was called Whip Queen Virgin of Venus, that sort of name. Classically. And there used to be a joke that if Don was publishing the Bible, he'd do it in 2 books. And I can't remember what they were, but they were both vaguely S&M sort of titles. Brian Aldiss's The Inheritors became Bow Down to Null. Tom Dish's White Fang Goes Dingo became Mankind Under the Leash, etc., etc., etc. I was sort of lucky. I never had one. But when I did a book which did have some S&M in it, Don thought it was literature. I mean, he didn't know why it was being offered. It was such a great book. And frankly, it wasn't one of my greatest books. And, you're really offering it to me? Are you sure? I'd love to do it. I actually changed the book because I was involved with somebody who was into all that stuff. And I'm not one to judge, without having kind of, at least some kind of experience.
Sampled it to a degree.
And it just isn't for me. I mean, I can't. I mean, I've only, I think, punched same person 3 times in his life, but that's about it.
Who was Charles that person?
Pratt. I mean, I might as well. Charles would probably remember. He was a really obnoxious kid. I mean, he really was. I had to throw him out of his own house one time. He was so obnoxious. I mean, it's one of those. Anyway, so apart from fisticuffs, where were we? Oh, yes. And all that. John Norman.
Sampling S&M involvement.
I wrote to the bloke at Smith's. I can't remember his name, but I knew him vaguely. And I said, look, you're doing this. You put New Worlds through all this because they'd banned New Worlds for no reason they could clearly identify, which meant that either they had filthy minds and didn't want to say anything, or they were so innocent they thought everything was filthy, except, of course, they were doing all kinds of porn magazines themselves. And I remember talking to a buyer at Smith's, and I said, well, you've got stuff on the floor here in your office that is far more pornographic than anything New Worlds has done. And he said, oh yes, but that sells, I don't know, and he told me some vast figure. And I thought, oh, so that's really where we are. You can be moral, if you haven't got a circulation big enough to make a good profit, but anything else goes by the wayside. But anyway, so I'd already had a history with Smiths overall. I also sent a copy of the letter to The Guardian. The response from the guy was, it's a bit unfair sending a letter, private letter to The Guardian when I hadn't had a chance to answer. And that was his answer. I mean, there was nothing. The fact is the Gore books, weren't hugely popular. It just seemed to me wrong that young boys, and they mostly are young boys, come into a shop selling science fiction, which is what they want to read and are interested in, and instead get something which is essentially mind-rotting. I mean, which is literally going to possibly change their, how they deal with the world and people in it. So, the least they could do is put it out of reach of kids. That's all I argued. Anyway, that was all it was. But I've always had this problem because compromise where censorship is concerned. I mean, the Americans are all saying how the British are censorship-ridden. They seem to think that. I've been in at conventions where they seem to think that. But self-censorship in America is just everywhere. It's prevalent.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And the reality is that if you spend a lot of time in American society, like you have, like I have, there is a massive amount of Britishness which doesn't exist.
No, and
here
they're
in the
always
UK.
Amazed, British people on the talk shows. You're saying that, you're coming out with that, and these are just ordinary things that you would normally expect to see on an English talk show or a French talk show. Anybody's talk show, but the Puritans, my idea for a game which was to save America from itself. It was a game called Sink the Mayflower. And you had to get the Puritans. I mean, that was all. Anybody else could come. It's not really fair because I don't think they were all Puritans on the Mayflower either.
No, I'm sure they weren't, but just a bit, many people of influence did. So to wrap it up on Gore, I think the thing, I completely agree with your stance on those books. I remember trying to read one of them when I was in high school and just thinking it was some weird, polemic for some kind of sexually fueled misogyny. It actually was really quite unpleasant to read. It wasn't a Sword and Planet novel in the way I expected it to be.
And he published a how-to book, which Don published. Which,
that's right.
How to do all this stuff.
That's right.
And of course, as usual, I was dragged into it. Little bit I was dragged into by a woman. There are women who confirm all this. So I always thought it was ridiculous to ask a woman, well, what do women want? because God knows what they want. They're the same as everybody else. They want different things. So there's always somebody going to support something like that. But I don't think there's really much of an argument. I mean, oh God, it's too complicated. I've had that argument too. I was part of a committee, a serious. We used to meet in the House of Parliament. I mean, it was a proper sort of thing on pornography, and how to deal with it. And it's such an incredibly difficult subject because I mean, I've known quite a few women who say, oh, no, it doesn't bother me. I do it, change my clothes, have a bath, and don't think about it. I knew one woman who wouldn't recognize you in the street if she was in her porn mode. She just refused.
Got it.
You'd know it too because she was all in somewhat different makeup. So and so it was a problem, and it is true that I did have a contretemps with Smiths, but as I say, in the end, history sort of did the trick, and the people who still want that stuff can go and get it in the specialist places, and I'm sure they still have it.
Absolutely.
And but you don't see it much in the general, on museum shelves.
No, you absolutely don't see it in the mainstream anymore. And I think that it's one of the side effects of the glorious variety of the internet, right? People who want to pursue that stuff, they can surround themselves with it 24/7 and not even have anybody. I remember I was sitting on a train coming back from, where was I? I know what it was. I was on an Amtrak train at night. I think I was going from San Diego to Los Angeles, and the sun had gone down, and there was a fairly respectable middle-class, businessman type, a couple of years older than I was then, who was sat there looking at his iPad, but because the sun had gone down outside, the mirror, the window next to him had become a mirror, and what he was actually looking at was like hardcore S&M, just reels and reels of it. He'd adopted this kind of scholarly look as if he was looking at business reports, but it's just endless amounts of S&M porn, for 2 whole hours.
That's how we used to,
and he had no idea that everyone else in the carriage could see it.
That's how we used to read comics at school, basically trying to look, like we're studying, and it's very hard to when Captain Marvel's up to something interesting.
So absolutely, so true. Shazam, for sure.
Sorry, I know. Poor old Captain Marvel's now been changed to Shazam and so on. Do you know I've got an original CC Beck that Paul he sent it to me when I was doing the Multiverse 25 years ago now, I suppose, and. He said, I know it's not a character, it's Gandalf. I know it's not a character you're particularly fond of, but in fact, C.C. Beck's Gandalf looked exactly like the wizard in Captain Marvel. So, it was quite...
Exactly like Shazam himself.
So there's no need to even to worry about it. But anyway, I'd completely forgotten he'd sent it. I found it. Linda found it. She's been going through a lot of pictures, and we've got a lot of pictures, and we haven't got wall space to put them all up. Wouldn't want to really, but anyway, and she found it, and she said, "You know what this is?" And I have no memory of him sending it, and I'm just afraid that I never thanked him for it. It's quite possible I did, and because my memories and that sort of thing is pretty terrible. Usually, if I'm working on a book, it doesn't really matter what you tell me or show me or do. I'll say, "Yeah, that's great," and carry on with the book.
And your focus focus remains on your work. It is well, hopefully he's listening in and he'll get to hear this because I know Paul a little bit and have had several really pleasant conversations with him over the years, and of course he's an endless font of knowledge about comics history and whatnot, and is a great creator in his own right. But what a lovely gift. I mean, a C.C. Beck original, I think that's going to, particularly if you've grown up reading like Captain Marvel.
I mean, Captain Marvel was amazing. I got into fights at school because almost everybody was a Superman fan. And Captain Marvel, they were harder to get hold of, the American ones with the proper colours and everything. Yeah. You can get them in black and white from whoever they were. I mean, there were the same people who did distributed Tarzan adventures. But anyway, you couldn't get them in colour. So you had to hope that some bloke from a base, had left one somewhere and it had got into a shop. You could buy them in secondhand bookshops then. The American comics, very hard to come by. You weren't even being able to get the Sunday newspapers. The imports were so strict at that point, and reasonably. I mean, America had, after all, bankrupted us, and we had to pay them back. So, we didn't get much of that stuff. So Captain Marvel really was. I love Captain Marvel. Superman, he was far too serious and.
I was just going to say, mate, I couldn't agree more, because I love the whimsy of Captain Marvel, and actually, I mean, his best mate's a talking tiger.
Exactly.
It's just walking around the neighbourhood he lives in.
He's got an uncle who can't really do it, but dresses up in the costume
and pretends he can. Yeah, Uncle Dudley. I mean, just brilliant. And I mean, the whole emphasis on family as well was really quite healthy, and also, if you like classic stuff, all you have to do is flip over to The Adventures of Captain Marvel Jr. with all that amazing Matt Raboy art. Do you remember that?
I mean, he was my
so beautiful.
Artist. I have to say, Captain Marvel Jr. was who I looked for most as a kid, just, I suppose, because of the drawing. I loved him. And probably Mary Marvel she was sort of the blandest she was sort of a token Marvel in my view. Anyway, and I think the fact that basically is a boy who turns into a man but is still a boy. I mean, he's still got got the kind of Stan Laurel puzzled head scratch from time to time. The other thing about Captain Marvel and the Marvel family is they were very anti-capitalistic. I mean, this was at a time when a lot more New Yorkers were left-wing. And I'm sure that the chances are the Binder brothers were left-wing. I mean, they were Jewish and in New York. I mean, they couldn't have been anything else. I don't know where they were. But anyway, the Binder brothers who wrote Captain Marvel and Beck himself, it's quite possible that they were quite strongly, if you like, liberal in their attitudes. So you got a lot of anti-greed stuff in the comics, stuff like that. There were subjects where an evil of some kind, and it was far more sort of focused in that way. I don't know. It was, to me anyway, it was the best, and it was the most consistently drawn comic too. I mean, I don't remember very many that that didn't at least look like Beck. I mean, I don't know how many Beck drew.
He was kind of unique talent. I think that's I hadn't thought about it before, but I'm racing through those stories in my mind. He's saying about the anti-capitalist underpinnings, and that's absolutely something that I now realise that I responded to very positively, as a young man. And you think in terms of the villains, that one step away from being these arch dictatorial figures, whether it's Black Adam or whether it's Eyeback, they're all hewing towards the extreme right.
Absolutely.
I think it's so interesting.
That's the only old comics I've got a small collection of. I'm not an obsessive collector. I like to have examples of stuff rather than the whole run of stuff. It's just also I haven't got room, and so I've got about 20 or so the Wiz comics or Captain Marvel comics of the period, and it's pretty consistent. I mean, it's not that. I think, to be fair, there was a generally liberal view to the comics in general, let's say DC and Marvel in particular, but all of the comics, because again, there was that whole kind of liberal sort of movement that came after World War II. I'm really thinking of of after World War II, I suppose. And people were idealistic, and there was a very strong emphasis, the returning soldier, GI Bill, things that were kind of, which meant were popular measures. I mean, FDR was still with us essentially at that point. So I think that even the DC comics, though not so evidently, I mean, DC has never been fond of politics anyway, as I know very well. When I've asked them to draw stuff, I finally got the back of Bill Clinton's head, I think, in the 90s. But they're just as that general, and I found that too with the Eagle, the Hulton comic, which came out when I was, I think, 10 or 11. It started. And it was hugely idealistic. One world,
absolutely.
One world, everybody equal, the planet, solving the problems of the planet together and all that. This is all by 1990, as well as two-way wrist radios and the like, and all the other good stuff that Arthur Clarke was putting into to those first serials. So and there was a really strong sense of idealism there, and it wasn't kind of Christian propaganda, even though Marcus Morris was a reverend. Page had the story of St. Paul on the back, apparently forever. I mean, in case some other St. Peter, probably. I couldn't, you can't tell the difference really. At least I couldn't, having not been brought up with any religion. So it all looks a bit odd to me. So I never really read the back page, but the drawing was very good, because throughout Eagle, I mean, there wasn't a single bad artist in the whole bunch. And it was a very well-known artist. Can't remember his name now. Anyway, and Eagle gave me my idealism. It's everything, anti-racism, one-worldism, all the various ideals that, that sort of power the ordinary progressive movements of the world came out of comics. I mean, if I think about it, based on Edgar Rice Burroughs, it certainly wouldn't have been quite the same at the time, The Law of the Jungle. But
I think you've tapped into something that was absolutely my experience as well, and everything you've just talked about politically and philosophically, they were big influences on me too, and they were all there. They're all there in comic books, which I read from a very early age.
Comic books we chose to read as well, Andy. I mean, for instance, I didn't like Black Hawk at all. I didn't like the war comics, English war comics. I had outs with Fleetway over I wouldn't do World War II comics because I wouldn't use the language that was required.
Oh, the negative kind of slurs against the Germans and the Japanese. I thought this can't go on. Of course, it is still going. I still think the History Channel is causing most of the Trump voters. I mean, it's they're just watching the same old rubbish over and over again. The secret history of Hitler's knickers, and just right on.
And you think, this is going into people who were not only not born at the time, they were generations ago now, and they're still thinking bloody Japs, rotten Germans, or whatever. It's probably going on the other side too.
Yeah, even more extreme.
So,
for sure.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm not a great believer in the History Channel. I think it's probably a force for evil, and Superman should, or somebody, Captain Marvel, would do something about it.
Just staying in the world of the Marvel family for a second, were you ever aware of the influence of Captain Marvel Jr. on Elvis?
No.
Have you ever heard this before? It's really quite fascinating. So apparently, stylistically, two of Elvis's biggest influences in terms of his look were Captain Marvel Jr. as illustrated by Mac Raboy, who we talked about, and Tony Curtis, which is where he got where we got the hairstyle from. And in later life, when you get to 1970s Las Vegas Elvis, all of his fantastical costumes, often designed by a guy called Bill Bellew, I think that's how you pronounce it. They were based on the DNA of Captain Marvel Jr. So Elvis's taking care of business pendant that he always wore, if you look at it, it's a lightning bolt with TCB on it. And all those vents and flares and everything, that's where it all comes from. He was a huge fan.
Nudies in Los Angeles? Nudies?
Oh man, I wish.
That was my tailor.
But the answer is no.
in my heyday.
Really?
It was marvelous. just the stuff they had on the racks, let alone the stuff they were making for people like Elvis and others. Yeah, I mean, I got some. I mean, I'm not saying they lasted. I mean, they're perfectly well made, but they didn't last in terms of fashion. But
I tell you, he was a big fan of their stuff.
And also, on the little block in North Hollywood where Nudie's was one of the few decent Indian restaurants in Los Angeles at the time. So you could actually go, if you were in funds, go and get yourself a nice jacket and then get curry stains all down it.
Well, Mike Nesmith of the Monkees. Once he set up his, when immediately after the Monkees, he got into his kind of country rock era, and he set up the first national band around that period of time. Progenitors of country rock to a degree. It's great stuff, actually. But on one of their album covers, one of the things he is wearing is a sort of purpose designed and made Nudie suit, which is just this completely phantasmagorical Wild West outfit with like big chrome stars in it.
And you always knew when Nudie was there. I mean, as old as the hills then, so he must be dead by now. Because his car, did you ever see a picture of his car? It's a Western.
Oh, no,
it's got horns coming out of it and guns for some of the controls. 6 guns for some of the controls. It's a Cadillac. It's a convertible. Look it up sometime. I'm sure it's easily found online. But it was a great car, and you always knew that Mr. Nudie was at the shop, which wasn't very often by then, I don't think, because But we lived just around the corner, and so it was it was our local. So it was very easy to the local booze shop decided, because I was British, I was an expert on beer, which I am not. I've got my favourites, but I've not. There are many beers I do not know. But I was very fond of Old Peculiar, which they only had in little bottles, which I hadn't seen before, but it wasn't bad. And so, I told them not to keep it in the fridge, but keep it in cellar temperature, and it would actually be a better porter. And so after I'd said that, they decided I was a beer. Every time I was in Letters from Hollywood, I think. I probably already said this. I'm repeating myself. But anyway, after I told him that, I'd become this great beer expert. What do you think of this? Should I show me lists, from his wholesalers? And I don't know. That looks like it might be. Anyway, that was.
There's a lot to be said for being the token Englishman in Los Angeles.
There weren't many in the part of that in North Hollywood. It's predominantly barrio, and so it was nearly all Mexican, except for the little block of shops where Nudies and the Indian restaurant were. A few people who like us who were renting cheaply in a nice little house. Well, it was Linda's house. I mean, I'm saying us, but actually I moved in with her. There's no question of it. I don't think I ever paid a penny in rent. It was very handy for the shops, and a nice place to live. I mean, I find, generally speaking, that, I don't know, it may not be true now, but we lived in Mexican areas, and like Venice was predominantly Mexican and black when we lived there. The only people who weren't were Japanese, and we rented a little, well, basically a garage they'd converted into an apartment at the back, and they were always very nice. I mean, I think Linda's dog, she was throwing a ball, and I think a ball went over a fence, and the neighbors would say, and the black lady across the street would come across and say, time to move your car, because you had to move your car for street cleaning. And it was a wonderful, of course, it's now all middle class. Yeah, it's like Notting Hill now. I mean, it's, not worth all
the identity. Yeah, no, all the identity is
we couldn't even find our old place in Venice. It altered so much and poshed up so much.
Yeah, the last time I was there, the only thing I could truly recognise from a couple of years ago was the canals all still seem to be the ones to the left seem to be massively preserved. Yeah, they're really quite beautiful. I mean, you could actually not be in Los Angeles.
I visited somebody. I don't think I knew them well. It was probably a girlfriend of Harlan's that he was trying to get rid of. which is why I was with him. I can't think of any other reason I'd have been there. But anyway, and she lived on one of those canals. It was a lovely little house. I mean, she had a little house on and it was, I just think of mosquitoes, though. I mean, that's probably kill a lot of mosquitoes, but they get me before I get them. The amount of fentanyl I'm on, they die happy. Everyone approves.
Now you meant right on, exactly. You know, fentanyl distributor to the insect kingdom.
Poor old Linda, she's got far more bites than I used to be covered in them. Nowadays they go, wow, whoa.
That's good shit, man. Hey, somebody mentioned in passing the Mike, and I wanted to ask you about your relationship with him, was Harlan Ellison. Yeah. So you know, what did you think of him? How did you guys get on?
Extremely well from the start, mostly by me insulting him, I think. I don't know what he wasn't used to we tend to do this in England, I think. It's a sort of a delayed response where the first response appears to be approving, and then the next thing you say kind of undercuts it completely, you know, oh, wonderful stuff, you know, for a moron, as it were. When I first met, it was at a Milford, one of the Milford things, and he was all right. I didn't know a great deal about him. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't much focused on American science fiction. Obviously, I knew the people, and I hadn't actually volunteered to go. Somebody, I suspect Judy Merrill, paid for me to go to this is in the States, in Milford, Pennsylvania. So that's how I got. And I'm not a great fan of writers' conferences, so I didn't really want to be there. I like, being the writer and talking to all the readers. I don't like having to talk to other people who've got readers. That's terrible. Sorry. I don't know why, but I just don't like writers' conferences.
Of course. No, that makes complete sense.
So Harlan was there. And he'd been talked about before he came, because he was the kind of person who gets talked about before they turn up. Turned up with Norman Spinrad, who was a close friend of his. They both lived nearby in Los Angeles. And I got on well with Norman too. We got on okay. But Harlan was forever projecting, because Harlan couldn't help but project some persona. I mean, when he was being serious, you could tell, because his voice changed to Edward G. Robinson at his most serious in a film. And it was just, that's what happened. I mean, you knew, this has got to be serious. Edward G. Robinson's coming on. I described him in an introduction, which he never really liked, but I had to tell the truth. I didn't think I was hurting his feelings, as a performer, that essentially he was a natural performer rather than a natural writer. Very few writers like to sit in shop windows with all the world to see while they compose. It's a performance. For him, almost all of it was a performance, including the many, many self-invented stories, the incredible complexity of lies that he told about himself, that he believed, by the time he was telling them. To the point where I think I told this story before about when we were at the Blitz Club. I mean, new romantics, limp-wristed new romantics to a man, as it were. I mean, none of them were going to be rolling up their sleeves and asking and a nice bunch of blokes. And I knew that The Damned, for instance, was science fiction fans and liked his work. I knew half the people in that fucking place were Ellison fans. I set him up an interview with a bloke whose name I forget, but who was very popular at the time with NME, who's promised to give him a front page and a double page spread. I mean, how many people get that except David Bowie, as it were? I mean,
right, like so. Charles Shaw Murray, one of those
Charlie,
kind of guys.
I know but it was one of those kind of guys. And I mean, I've had my.
Paul Morley. Would be another kind of candidate, one of those.
And I said, well, we'll meet at Blitz, because there's a friend of mine was performing there that night, and I was going to go, and watch him, as it were, and have a drink, and I knew it would be a good environment for Harlan's very, very delicate ego. And, then he'd have lots of people there, glad to see him. So we got the band was a guy called Richard Strange. I don't know if you remember him as sort of slightly, yeah.
Oh, I do. Yeah, for sure.
And so he was there with his band. Every one of whom, including Richard, was a Harlan Ellison fan. I mean, a real they'd read more than I had. So, I standing there chatting. They haven't gone on yet. We're just standing around talking. And Richard's sax player says, when are you going to give us a novel then? What everybody asks Harlan, who likes Harlan's work? Harlan turns to me, snarls, let's get the hell out of here. Because, of course, he's never going to do a novel. Ever, ever, ever. But he keeps telling people he is. And I'm stuck. I mean, I've got a friend here I'm supposed to be cheering on, as it were. And I've got a friend here who wants to get out. And I've got the bloke who's supposed to interview him waiting outside, the little table they had there.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, this is not a good time to be leaving. So I think I took him home. I know I didn't go back. It was too embarrassing, to keep, what could I have said to all these nice guys? I mean, the only person there I didn't like was Captain Sensible, and nobody likes Captain Sensible. I mean, they were all nice guys. Dave Banyan, they were just incredibly nice guys.
Dave Banyan's a really nice guy, actually, isn't he? He's lovely. Yeah, I agree.
You couldn't get a nicer bunch at all. Maybe, I don't know what it was. Maybe he thought it was, but anyway, so that was that. Some 2 weeks later, I'm in Sherman Oaks and I go to see Harlan. He's got a bunch of people at his house. Oh, Mike, come in, great to see you. Yeah, come in, great. Yeah. I was just telling these guys how we fought our way out of this cellar full of punks. I said, what? And he elaborated. And I started to do what I usually did, which was, that isn't what happened, Harlan. And I thought, fuck it. If that's what happened, that's what happened. But
it's the man who shot Liberty Valance time.
Conservative underneath gang stuff. I seriously doubt that his knowledge of gangs was anything but other books about gangs or movies or whatever. He would in LA, he would only go to the same restaurants. He wouldn't go out of a certain area. He never came to see us in Venice, not once.
Wow. Yeah.
And quite timid people would risk it sometimes. There's nothing to risk, but that's how they think. Yeah, and so he was a sort of timid, nerdy, kind, generous construct. Well, the kindness and generosity was not a construct. The nerdiness and the rest of it was him. As I said, we're all nerds underneath. Some of us just have better table manners or whatever. And I don't wear the same T-shirt, every time.
Every day.
I was going to wear my. I've got a
change your T-shirt.
Chapter Doctor Who T-shirt, but it was getting a bit manky. So, and also it's just too hot, so I'm wearing a loose. And I don't think I'm putting him down to say this because I've seen him do incredibly brave things. A friend of mine, a guy I knew called Bobby Littman, who's a film agent and nice guy. I wanted to do Elric, and I, in the end, didn't want to do Elric with Bobby, but that's another story, and Bobby would probably agree. But Bobby says he used to, he lived in New York, the same building as Harlan lived when they lived in New York. And he lived on the 11th floor, and he thought that Harlan probably lived on the 14th floor, he's a bit up. He knew him, he knew him slightly. He said one day he looks out of his window on the 11th floor, and he sort of thinks he's just seen something, kind of a shadow or something go past. So he goes up to his window and he looks, and there's Harlan, 11 stories up, climbing up the side of the building because he's forgotten his keys. You never heard him tell a story like that. He tells a story about how he once blacked up like a commando and went and climbed some big roller coaster, which is sort of meaningless to me. But I mean, and I had been with him when there'd been a bum on the street who's obviously collapsed in New York again.
Yeah.
And not hard, not hard to step over, actually.
No.
And, the guy's clearly a bum, but he's out of it, and he's had some sort of episode. He's not passed out. He's had some sort of episode. So we're with a very nice editor at the time called Vicky Shockett, who lived nearby. And she went and phoned an ambulance. We didn't have cell phones in those days. And the ambulance turns up. Harlan and I wait with the guy until the guys in the ambulance say, we're not taking him. He's just a bum. We know. He just wants to get a warm bed for the night. And Harlan, all 3 feet tall of him, reaches up into the cab, grabs the bloke by his lapels, drags him out of the cab, and snarls in his face, "You will take this guy to hospital, or I will wrench first your left arm off, then." So they took him. They probably dumped him around the corner later, but nonetheless. Yeah. And so I've seen him do things and kindnesses to people. Kindnesses to people. He has no. There's nothing in it for him, nothing except just, being sweet. And it's got him into serious trouble sometimes because he had no common sense at all. His life had become such a fantasy, such a construct that he really could hardly work anymore. And about the only times he did work seemed to be in shop windows. I mean, I stayed with him for weeks and months, not entirely all the time with him, but with him. I mean, long time. I doubt if I ever saw him. Once I saw him finish a very, very short intro to A Boy and His Dog, I think it was, because he'd already conned the publisher out of all the money and hadn't done the story. The guy came out to the airport, Los Angeles airport, from New York with the check that Harlan demanded, because Harlan said he had the story ready for him and he could go home with the story. Harlan sent his assistant out, got the check, no story. I don't think it was Jim Bain. I never had much sympathy for Jim Bain, so I didn't particularly mind. But that's classically what Harlan could do at his heyday as he was a spieler. I mean, it was just who he was, and it was almost wasted on he had no idea of plotting. He couldn't plot to save his life. His film scripts were just a mess. I mean, nobody could, I don't know, maybe there was some, because I know some were filmed, or TV stuff anyway. Oh, and he did that prize one too, didn't he? It was filmed.
Yeah, the prize. Now that's interesting, because the prize is mentioned in an anecdote about Harlan that I was wondering if you were aware of it. Have you ever read that great Esquire piece by Gay Talese? It's called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold.
I've read the extract that deals with Harlan. Yeah, and that actually happened. Yeah. That's because in a way you're dealing with another person who's a complete construct, Frank Sinatra. Yeah, I mean, tremendous talent. Exactly.
Very prolific. Unbelievable.
About 3 feet tall too. I mean, it's like Muppet Five. I think the other ones, the Munchkins. Anyway, yeah, he'd let almost anybody stay at his house, and he would go away and let people stay in his house, and he had and apparently still has there at the house an incredible collection of comic books, going back to #1 Superman, all that sort of thing. What I didn't know about him, and only found out a day or so ago, Linda saw it, is that I was wondering how on earth he was making any money, because he ran out of credibility with publishers, because he sold Dangerous Visions several times without paying the authors who were in Dangerous Visions. So I was very, very critical of. I mean, I wouldn't speak to Harlan for 2 or 3 years because I just got sick of his behavior.
I got sick.
Yeah, but he had a heart attack. So I had to phone him and I said, if you're going to have a fucking heart attack every time you want my attention. Anyway, he wasn't writing much. He was recycling collections of short stories. He must have He says, his whole thing was, Harlan Ellison has written 10,000 books, but there are, of course, 10,000 books that were all the same, just in different order of stories. But he started reading, doing audiobooks, and I didn't know that at all. And, I don't really read Locus, and maybe they've said it in there somewhere, but I think maybe that's where Linda read it. I'm a life subscriber to Locus and the New Statesman. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of how I can stay alive, long enough to get the best out of my subscription.
Out of your subscription.
Anyway,
you've actually, Mike, you've given me the key to something here to understanding the Harlan Ellison, whose work, when I've dipped into it, I very much enjoyed. But there were so many unfinished projects wrapped around him. I remember. This must have been when I was at the end of my era of high school, at the end of high school, so early 80s. I remember seeing an advert for a Shadow graphic novel that was going to be called Dragon Shadows. And it was because a lot of Shadow stories take place in Chinatown. It was one of those. And it was going to be written by Harlan, and it's going to be illustrated by Michael Kaluta. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I can't wait to just never turned up. It's one of those books that was solicited, great image by Kaluta. Never heard another thing about it.
He did a lot of stuff. I mean, he didn't turn in. Linda, when she was working for him, there were two very nice producers. I mean, they were producers who'd been involved in the whole McCarthy thing and everything, and sort of they kind of stuck in there. I think they were the actual producers of Spartacus, who did most of the stuff that Kirk Douglas later claimed to do, which was rather unpleasant.
Yeah,
I love Kirk Douglas as a film actor, but he wasn't the hero of the left that he.
Yeah, right. The great employer of Dalton Trumbo.
It was these guys who'd done all of that, Dalton Trumbo included. So
yeah,
and they said to Linda, "We know he's going to lie to us on the phone. We know him. He's going to lie to us on the phone. Could you just please, every so often, just confirm?" I think this is what they said. I mean, she would confirm, but it's something like this. Just confirm, yes or no, whether something we say is accurate. Has he done any work on the script today, as it were? I don't know whether she ever had that one, but, that was the sort of question. And I think it was for the first script of Robot, which anyway was, for some reason, producers all say the same thing, and directors sometimes also say, don't worry about the cost. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Just write the script the way you want it written. And think, well, why the hell should I? Because I know you're going to start, cutting it here, cutting there. Oh, we can't afford that. We can't do that. I mean, there is no movie. I mean, there is an ultimate movie you could make, but sooner or later, something is going to happen to it. Anyway,
and of course, producers love to validate their own existence.
But these were
messing with the work of authors,
particularly, idealistic producers. I mean, with an incredibly good track record and everything. I mean, they had everything. And Linda loves them to this day. I think they did. There's a classic film they did that's very well known. I mean, really a great film. Can't remember. Anyway, she would know, but she's not here. And I don't think he ever finished the script. He, actually turned in a finished script. And after a while, you can, if you've got a gift of the gab like Harlan, you can, talk your way out of it for a while. But sooner or later, you've got to deliver, because what Harlan didn't seem to realize is publishers talk amongst themselves. They actually have friends in other publishing companies. Perhaps they both worked at the same one at one point or whatever. But they say, hey, I just paid Harlan, $dollars for a story. We should be getting it by next week. And the person will say, oddly enough, we just paid. we didn't ever get it. So he ruined his own credit, and it was considerable. I mean, it was, and people would recognize you in restaurants. If they didn't, of course, you would make sure that they did. Unfortunately, oh God, the battery's going. Unfortunately, can you see me? Hear me?
What
was I saying? Oh yeah, unfortunately he dragged me in on it. Like we'd be in Barnes and Noble. He'd say, "Hey, Mike Moorcock, your books are over here," and of course I'd be shrinking into the ground. And he thought he was doing me a favor in his own lights. What are we going to do about this?
Well, mate. Well, I think the universe is sending us a message that it's a good time to wrap up, because we're almost exactly an hour in, and it's been fascinating hearing your kind of last word on your friend Harlan Ellison. I
don't want people to think I disliked him or despised him, because I didn't. I really, both of us cared for him incredibly. I mean, we were fucking spoon feeding him ice cream when he would sulk in bed. And talking like parents, you go and feed him. No, it's your turn to go and feed him. No, I'm not feeding him. He's old enough to feed himself. So anyway.
Well, Mike, that was a glorious journey from John Norman and Townsend of Gore through Captain Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. onto Harlan Ellison, and we didn't talk about music once, very briefly, with Elvis Presley. So we've still got all of that.
I think I mentioned Hawkwind once too at some point. That was before we started. That was in Liverpool Stadium.
Yes, the Liverpool Hawkwind anecdote. Yeah, that'll be in there too.
It's great, depending how you see it, about Liverpool Stadium. So remember that for next time.
Right, that is where we will start next time, mate.
Okay. Cheers, Andy.
Great to see you, pal. You take care. I'll see you very soon.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Same to you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Hard Agree. This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, Denio. Hard Agree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.